Okay, today I'm going to show you how I do the kind of burnt exhaust look that some people have seen on my Corvus Blackstar that I painted for the Deathwatch. I'm going to be doing it on this Storm Talon, which this is literally just from my bits box. It was lying around. It is very, very broken. It's not going to get used for anything else, so I thought might as well do it on this. So it's been primed black. And I'm going to show you two different methods. I'm going to show you one using an airbrush and one using a paintbrush. I'm going to start with the airbrush method first. I'm going to start with some Vallejo metal colour exhaust manifold. I'm going to be using 3 Vallejo metal colour paints. Exhaust manifold, silver, although you could use aluminium or duralumin or any kind of bright metallic colour from their range. Steel is also good. I just happen to have silver. And Vallejo metal colour, gold. These specifically formulated for going through the airbrush, and they all need a really good shake before using them. Not sure if it shows up on camera here. I think you can see it here on the exhaust manifold. If you can see the pigment on the bottom of the bottle, you've not shaken it enough yet, so you need to shake it some more. I'm using a Harden Steenbeck Evolution with a 0.4mm needle. It's shooting at about 30 psi, and I'm going to be putting this pretty much straight into the airbrush. So I'm not going to thin this down. Just running this straight through the airbrush. Now, if you've already painted your base colours on your model, you'll want to mask them off for this. Or you can do this before you paint those and mask off the engines after you've done them, which on some models can actually be a bit easier way of doing it. Okay, just going to give these a quick base coat of exhaust manifold all over the engine area. And around like that. It doesn't matter if we leave a little bit of a shadow in here where it meets the fuselage at all. And so that's our first colour. Okay, now I'm going to use some of the Vallejo metal colour silver. Like I said, you can use any brighter silver that you want. I just happen to really like this one, and it's what I have, and I've only got 3 of these paints. Throw your model around, that's important. And we're just going to highlight this across the top and towards the end. Just leave some of that exhaust manifold at the back there, and that's pretty much it. We're now done on the airbrush method for the metallics. Okay, so next up I'm using Vallejo metal colour gold. Now if you look at most heat scorched metals, they shift in colour through gold, purple to blue, and then if there's like soot around it'll be black, but blue is always at the hottest point. So I'm going to do this by using actually gold, because if you look at the source for it, all of these colours still have a metallic sheen to them. And you could spray, say, yellow or brown ink coat with this, but I actually find I get the best results using actual gold paint. So what we're going to do is we're going to pick our point, and I'm going to basically go to this section here, so the middle of the engine. And I'm going to practice getting a nice fine band, because I don't want to paint the entire back of the engine this colour. I just want to paint a band around the middle. like that. Because if we paint this all the way to the end, and when we get to our blue is actually going over gold, and it will cause a weird filter thing to happen, and it won't look quite as blue. So, stay. Okay. So that's our metallics done for the airbrush method. Next, I'm going to take some violet ink. This is Vallejo game ink. And we're going to put this in our airbrush. And we're going to thin it down a little bit. It's about 1:1 mixed with water. It's what we want. So I'm going to do 1, 2, 3 drops of ink. And then 1, 2, 3 drops of water, and then I need to mix that up with an old paintbrush. And you should be able to see it's still relatively opaque, but it's going to be much thinner than if we used it neat. Now I've turned my pressure down to about 20 psi for this because it's very thin and doesn't need anywhere near as much help getting out of the airbrush. So now we're going to paint a band. I'm going to aim it at this third kind of layered bit thing. I don't know what the technical term is, but I'm basically going to aim it between where I want the blue, which will be on the end, and this where the purple blends into the silver. So let's start off the model to try and aim it. So I'm actually using part of my hand there in order to make sure I know roughly where I'm aiming it. Now, because it's going on so wet, you want to alternate between using air and using paint to dry off what you've done. A thing you can do is kind of rock back and forth on the trigger in order to let a tiny amount of paint out, followed up by air immediately. And the closer you get to the model, the more accurate your cone will be. Oops, a bit too much. It's alright though. Got a bit of tipped, right, hang on. And that's purple colour done. It can be sometimes hard to get into these areas down the sides here, but you can usually find an angle that will work. Okay, now we're going to do the exact same thing, but this time we're using blue ink instead of violet. Give it a test on some tissue. Looking good. And this time we want it right on the very end. Now the great thing about using the inks is that you still get that metallic sheen underneath them because they're translucent. And I'm just going to make a point of getting that side as well, the back. Now if you wanted to add some soot to this, which I'm not going to, you just spray some black paint along the back side of the engine, just as you've done there, as you did with the blue. That's the airbrush method. I'm now going to show you how I do this over here on this other engine with a dry brush. So I'm using the same paints, starting with exhaust manifold, and these paints are very wet, but they do dry brush. So you can see I've absorbed some on there. This is incredibly wet. So you really want to make sure that you get all of this off as well, as much as you can. Now this is mostly just for a base coat. So when it's about kind of, I don't know if you can see this particularly well, when it's leaving a little streak, that's about where we want it for being able to actually base coat this engine. Just kind of use stabbing motions. Doesn't really matter. You don't really want to maintain like any one direction for this because we're just trying to get the paint on there. It won't be quite as shiny as the airbrush method. So if it's actually something that you want as a look, then that is an option. So that's our exhaust manifold. And we'll wait for that to dry before we carry on to the next step, which will be the silver. So now I'm using the silver paint, same brush, same kind of technique, but this time we're not going as far back. So starting back here and just going, I'm going side to side because I want this to pick up on everything, not on any specific edges just yet. And if you're wondering, this is actually just a makeup brush. It's like a £1 makeup brush that I have for doing big things like this. It's really good because it's really soft, holds a lot of paint. It gives a really nice smooth finish. And you can see it's not quite as shiny, but if we let it dry, do it again, let it dry, do it again, a couple of times, we can get it to be quite almost as shiny as the one we airbrushed. It just takes a little bit longer though. Okay, so that's after 3 coats, three dry brushes essentially. You can see here it's actually come up to quite a nice shine that's almost equivalent to the airbrushed one. The only difference really is that it takes longer. Also, don't put this paint into a wet palette, it will go really, really weird. You want to put it into a regular dry palette. So once that's dry, we're going to go over to the gold. Give this again a really good shake on everything. Small spot into our dry palette. Pick up the gold with your dry brush. Now this has a tendency to not be quite as saturated when you dry brush it. And we're mostly going to use kind of a stippling motion like that. But we're going to do it, same method. Just going to build it up in that middle area. And you've actually got probably a little bit more control over this stage than the airbrush stage. Because it kind of builds up more gradually. So now, same as before, this time we're going to use the Violet Ink Neat, because we're actually going to dry brush with some ink of all things. But we want to use ink because it's very, very translucent. So we're going to get through quite a bit of this. And this is mostly just because we want to use the stippling motion in order to apply it. So we're going to have to build this up over several very thin layers. Letting each one dry before doing the next. So make sure each layer dries before carrying on to the next one. So there we go, like that. Same again with the blue ink. And again, same as before. But you can kind of more just brush it on because this is the very end. The softer the brush, the better the effect will be. Soft brushes are really good for stippling like this. That's why I prefer to use makeup brushes, because they're very, very soft. So I'm going to let that dry and do another coat just to build up the saturation and the coverage of that blue. So there we go, that's that stippled side after another coat of blue. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back in with a little bit of violet ink, again, just to smooth out the blend between the blue and the violet, and then I'm going to go back. So you go up one way, putting your base coats down, and then you can go back the other way to smooth everything out. So I've got some problem spots there. And this will give us that final level of intensity that we'd so desire to match the airbrushed side. Gold. And there we have it. So, last step for both of these is to take some Necron compound, which, just let me get that. So this is GW's Necron compound. This is pretty much the only dry brush paint that I actually use with any regularity anymore. So mine's gone all kind of weird in the pot, which it always does. And we just want to slap around our brush in there, scrape off the big lumps, get ourselves another bit of tissue, really wipe off as much as you can. And then I'm going to do this on both of them. I'm basically going to dry brush from the back of the engine very gently to the front. And this will just pick up all the raised details and will highlight them. But it will also kind of indicate to you that, you know, those areas aren't quite as hot as the rest of the engine. And that's basically it. So, over here, and it's going to be hard to tell on the camera. Let me see if I can zoom in a bit. There we go. So this one is the airbrushed one. You can see that the transitions are slightly smoother, and this one took us a lot less time to paint. Did this in about 5 minutes. And this one is the stippled / drybrushed one. It still looks good. It works even better on smaller surfaces, for example, the barrels of melter guns. But it's not quite as smooth, and it definitely takes longer than the airbrushed version. But on the tabletop, you won't really be able to tell the difference between the two. So there we go. That's how I paint the burnt metal exhaust effects on aircraft. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give us a like. If you didn't, feel free to dislike. It's no skin off my nose. Leave us a comment below with anything else you'd like to see me tackle in the future. And there's a subscribe button there. No, somewhere. Patreon as well, and YouTube thinks you'll like this other video. Thanks for watching. I'll see you around. Bye bye.